Discussing a college prospect and attempting to translate their production to the NFL in spite of the scarce amount of true indicators at each position is always an engaging conversation because everyone has a different perspective and nothing is definite, something I for one have learned the hard way many times now. If you are an analytics junkie discussing receivers, you may point to the misrepresentation of the 40-yard dash, pushing the idea that the measurement of speed in a vacuum is far too heavily weighted in the draft stock at the position, and it is a big reason why we've seen such a growth in on-field tracking data among NFL front offices in recent years. If you are a film truther, there is the complication of being a human being. No one is a robot, everyone is going to have their own biases, and even the most objective person only has the luxury of viewing an individual player relative to the teams they play as well as the situation they are in. Those who are unequivocally able to dominate the best competition in the country while possessing the physical traits of an alien are your blue chip prospects such as Myles Garrett, Cam Newton, and Andrew Luck, players who, no matter where they went, were not going to fail. For this video, I want to discuss the other 99%, the guys who aren't seen as perfect, but more so projects. Specifically, the strategy and approach to drafting and developing a franchise quarterback. Let us begin the conversation by going through the thought process behind drafting a quarterback, which is of course to lead your team into the future as the cornerstone of the organization. Most of the time, these guys will be found early in the first round. Ever so often, you'll get a mid-round hit. But the most curious draft strategy is those who do neither, but instead go after a quarterback in the second round. The opposition to this thinking is that if they are so confident that this is their guy, this is their quarterback, why not take him in the first round? If you are so confident that this is the guy to lead your team into the future, then why risk missing out on him? Well, it's because the reality is they are not. It's almost as if it is a pressure pick for certain teams stuck in a purgatory at the position in which they don't have any youthful options on their current roster, and they need something to save face, so they take the quarterback because he fell to them. The long-term reality of the situation is that unless you are taking a player that you don't really need but you truly believe in, unnecessarily taking a quarterback with the selection is wasting a high-value asset. Over the last decade, we have seen this story play out 6 total times with Will Levis, Kyle Trask, Jalen Hurts, Drew Lock, Deshaun Kaiser, and Christian Hackenberg. Of these 6 quarterbacks, only one has had any sort of real success, being Jalen Hurts, who ironically is one of the most controversially discussed quarterbacks in the league because of the situation he is a part of. No matter how you feel about Hurts, this situation played a huge factor in his ability to develop. Protecting your quarterback and giving him an elite offensive mind to bounce ideas off of and learn from is huge. Hurts was drafted into a team that didn't have a lot of true holes outside of receiver, a position they addressed early in the first round that year. Poorly sure with the selection of Jalen Reagor, but it made the option of selecting Jalen Hurts a luxury. It was not something they were forcing. These other guys, in most part, did not have the same advantage of being able to take a backseat in a great organization, which I do not say as an excuse to the players in question, but more so to establish the organizational failure behind throwing an unfinished product to the Wolves without any protection or weapons and expecting them to turn the tides. On the contrary, you have Kyle Trask and Christian Hackenberg. One has not had a start in 4 years and the other retired before he got the chance. All of whom fall into the same group though of wasted draft picks that could have been used towards building a foundation in preparation for the opportunity to bring an elite quarterback on board. Obviously, hindsight is 2020, but focusing on the Browns situation in a quarterback draft that included Mitch Trubisky, Patrick Mahomes, and Deshaun Watson, the Browns stayed put with 4 picks in the top 52. The Chiefs, on the other hand, did not. Despite having Alex Smith on a team coming off a 12-4 season, they traded 2 firsts and a third to move up 17 picks and select Patrick Mahomes. They have since reaped the benefits immensely, all while the Browns continue to sit in this aforementioned quarterback purgatory despite their best efforts to get out. My point of this whole rant surrounding the thought process behind drafting a quarterback is that you can't establish who you want leading your franchise unless you are willing to put yourself in a position to obtain them. The quarterback is the most important person in the organization, not the owner, not the general manager, the quarterback, and not treating it as such is how talent elsewhere gets wasted. This is not to say a team will be successful off of the mere goal of trading up for their pick of the litter. which is specifically why I am making this video because of this draft class. There will not always be a class of quarterbacks worth trading up for. Jumping back to relativity and why it makes coming to an objective conclusion about each position group so difficult. It's not just about the scenario they are in or the competition they face, but it's also separating the prospect from solely the talent in their draft class. This exact scenario is how a team like the Steelers ends up taking a player like Kenny Pickett with the 20th overall pick in the draft, a 24-year-old with the smallest hands as a starter the league has ever seen, not to mention his tape wasn't all that great. Nothing was really pointing towards Kenny Pickett translating to the league outside of his senior year production, which is the reason the Steelers even had the opportunity to begin with to take the first quarterback off the board that late into the draft. Creating a benchmark for a position and comparing all future players to that benchmark is a necessity for finding a consistency in grading prospects. Once it has been established that there are quarterbacks in the class that hold their own against top draftees of years prior, you make the move. In more recent history, there are two options beyond this point. Do you go with the raw alien of a talent who is going to need patience and a lot of reps, or do you take the older, more polished leader in the clubhouse? From a broad perspective, this seems abstract based upon many things, such as the point in a rebuild a team currently sits, but in my opinion, it's more black and white. The truth of the matter is that in today's league, the odds are immensely against you in your quest for a Super Bowl if you don't have a superhuman at quarterback. The last Super Bowl champion we have seen with a true game manager at the helm was 10 years ago, in which Peyton Manning on his last leg was hoisted to the top by one of the best defenses in NFL history. That is what it takes at this point. If you are not going to have a quarterback that can go drive for drive, you need a historically great defense to back them up. Although only one of these are able to be kept in-house on a consistent basis, paying one player a significant amount of your overall cap space to keep you in contention every year is much easier than to pay an entire defense, which is what is needed. Every piece to a defense is important. If there is a weak link, great offenses will find it. The ultimate endgame of the sport is to win Super Bowls. Falling short of that, whether it be playoffs or regular season, makes no difference outside of draft selection, so I'd much rather miss the playoffs for 7 to 8 years while going all in on aliens than loiter in a pit of mediocrity over that same time span. Now, this isn't to say that I agree with teams simply throwing assets at athletes to play the position. There are traits that should go into the decision, which is where the tape and learning the player come into frame. Establishing whether the character that possesses this raw, untouched talent has the drive and humility to harness it. There are many instances that can be used as guidelines for what this looks like, such as Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes, each of whom have had completely different journeys to essentially the big three of the NFL, but that is exactly where all of them have landed. Lamar Jackson was under-recruited to Louisville and was the 32nd overall pick in the draft, which fueled his determination to prove his doubters wrong and made him one of the most competitive players in the league. At some points to a fault, with the questions arising in recent years as to whether or not this drive to be great has put too much weight on his shoulders, limited his overall production in the playoffs. In his development though, this is the very thing that has pushed him to a Hall of Fame lock at the age of 28. Josh Allen didn't have a single Division I offer out of high school. It took a year of community college for him to work his way to Wyoming. And when he got there, while the numbers he put up in his 3 years weren't great, what he showed beyond the box score is the reason he got drafted. The humility to take a step back and work in the shadow on turning this 6'5" frame into a legit prospect, the same humility that would later turn him into a superstar. After a poor rookie year, Josh Allen's reliance on his arm was becoming too much. Along with the inaccuracies, it was leading to shoulder pain. To combat this, he worked with biometric expert Chris Hess, who along with Allen's willingness to rebuild his throwing motion, worked on lengthening Allen's arm slot in order to allow everything else to catch up. Not only did it negate the pain, but it drastically improved his accuracy because, as he states, his arm became sort of like a catapult, meaning wherever his hand finished was where the ball would go, a consistency. The only factor he had to adjust for was launch angle. Now, obviously the counter to this argument has been comparing a quarterback to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson is insane. that is way too high of expectations because they are anomalies. To this I say, isn't the goal of trying to find elite quarterback play to find an anomaly? To find the one guy out of hundreds of prospects that is going to defy the odds and be the next version of that. In theory, this works with everyone in the organization being on the same page, giving the quarterback free range to not only grow as a player, but as a person. In practice, it's not that simple though, as we've seen more recently with a guy like Anthony Richardson. There are so many variables that can go against the process of giving this alien of a talent the best chance to develop. His case has provided almost all of these: injuries, a lack of trust within the organization, the talent surrounding him. What has been going on in Indianapolis over the last 2 years has been about the complete opposite of how a guy like Anthony Richardson should be developed. But not in the way most people are probably thinking. Richardson should not have rode the bench for a year. Mentally, him seeing live reps is what he needs most. Where the Colts have truly failed is protecting him during these live reps, which I stated earlier is the most important part of the process. I really don't want to turn this into an Anthony Richardson video, but it's to prove a point that even the consensus worst quarterback of this breed is not necessarily the problem. In the back half of last season, he was playing legitimately great football when he was kept clean. The problem lies that he has been one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the league, which only rose during that time span. This offseason is why you draft these types of talents with character in mind. He is taking about every snippet of advice he can get his hands on. Richardson is going to work with Chris Hess and Josh Allen. He's working in VR to simulate live reps, which is in large part how Jaden Daniels so quickly adjusted to the speed of the NFL. Keeping in mind, this is Richardson's first fully healthy offseason. Yet, even with all of these variables going against his development through 2 seasons, the Colts still sit in a much better position than every other team that has sat in this pit of mediocrity, which is truly the focal point of making these type of selections. Everyone is going to have their own opinions. Discussing quarterbacks is one of the most diverse discussions in sports, and if this video did anything, I hope it's just to continue the conversation. I hope you all enjoyed. Any support, like, comment, subscribe is appreciated. I'm going to try and post more long-form content on here consistently, but thank you for watching.